Hello. Oh, sorry. Um, what? Sorry. Sorry. Well, this is called Real Abstraction, the Given Revisited. It's actually a paper that Conrad invited me to actually deliver again. This paper, like it was ready for a while already, but it's kind of I'll be delving into the things that we were discussing already in the morning, particularly with Conrad and about Zonhattel. So originally, this paper was an attempt at bringing together two different traditions, like the tradition of real abstraction in Marxism, in the figure of Alfred Zonhattel, but also the philosophy of language of Wilfrid Sellars. So there was like the kind of intercourse between these two thinkers kind of made it possible to put some test the hypothesis of real abstraction to me, in a sense. But here I'm trying to also engage Conrad himself, like since he's going to be talking about his book on Monday, not in this conference, but there will be a lecture on Monday. So I'm engaging also what Conrad is writing in the book in terms of seeing if this framework that is developed here can answer some of the issues that he's putting in the book. So this is why I'm trying to reinterpret the paper. So let's start with this problem, like it's it's there. A kind of methodological problem of Marxism, like the famous, super famous, ultra famous quote: "The concrete is concrete because it is a concentration of many determinations, hence unity of the diverse. It appears in the process of thinking, therefore, as a process of concentration, as a result, not as a point of departure, even though it is the point of departure in reality, and hence also the point of departure for observation and conception." So here we have like this concept of abstraction, which is not an empiricist concept, simply like a concept of the abstraction as the contact, sheer contact with an exterior kind of object, and the kind of relationship to the idea of the object or a certain property of the object that we get from this sheer contact. Actually, the method of political economy would actually engage abstractions and reconstruct the concreteness out of such abstractions. So this is a kind of the problem of abstraction, methodological abstraction in Marxism. And also there's this quote by Althusser: "Science always works on something general, even if this has a form of a fact. At this moment of constitution, as for physics with Galileo, and for the science of evolution of social formations, historical materialism with Marx, a science always works on existing concepts, Vorstellungen, that is a preliminary generality one of an ideological nature. It does not work on a purely objective given." So given is basically the concept being attacked here because it's a central concept of empiricism in a certain sense. On the contrary, its particular labor consists of elaborating its own scientific facts through a critique of the ideological facts elaborated by an earlier ideological theoretical practice. So again, it's one of the elaborations of this problem of abstraction in the sense of what is the relationship of between the scientific fact and the real object. As much as in Marx, what is the relationship between abstraction that is supposed to reconstitute concreteness and the concrete object itself, if it's not to be portrayed or construed in the empiricist sense. So here's Conrad, the Althusserian empaths. So he puts the problem well. Theoretically, the problem of epistemology has long vexed Marxism. During the latter half of his life, Marx was singularly dedicated to the completion of a critique of political economy. This dedication, so the story goes, prevented him from outfitting his mature works with that sine qua non of systematic philosophy, a theory of knowledge, of explaining, in other words, how a subject plopped into the world experiences such and such phenomena, translating the white noise of nature into veritable logical statements. So, and here, like the real problem of that I just mentioned, also in Conrad's words, it is all well and fine to, as Althusser did, map Spinoza's three types of knowledge into Marxism, declaring that the concrete in thought can only be assessed through the mediation of abstract theory and the concrete real. But how is one supposed to mediate the concrete real if access to it is a priori prohibited? So since we don't have like the direct access to the object, but the object is developed or unfolded out of a previous ideological kind of notion. So in a sense, you have like this rationalist closed circle. So you have like two different models. One is a model of a given, where actually you are not constructing the object with this complexity, with this concreteness, as Marx would say. On the other side, you are closed within a rationalist circle without contact to experience to the outside. So this is José Arthur Gianotti, like it was a Brazilian Marxist that I really liked. He also articulates this problem. Against Althusser, he maintained that such mirroring, like the reproduction of the concrete real in the concrete in thought, only becomes possible because the process of categorical constitution takes place in reality itself. So here we approach the thesis of real abstraction again, as contraposed sorry, to the becoming of the phenomenon, a process that configures the essence of a determined mode of production and consequently of a form of sociability. The essence is part of each moment of the concrete without exhausting all its dimensions. So the discourse would only become scientific when it reproduced the order of this ontological constitution. This does not mean that we are confusing the object of thought with the real object, which is like the Althuserian duality, but simply that by going from the abstract to the concrete instead of the concrete to the abstract, we are formulating a discourse that reproduces an essential synthesis that takes place beyond theoretical practice. So basically the thesis of the constitution of the abstraction in the social world beyond purely theoretical practice. So real abstraction is not a thought abstraction, right? And here, like the thesis one, I'm not going to read all of that because we discussed this enough, but it's a quote from Warenform und Denkform by Zonhattel. I think the most important thing is the last sentence. It says, between the spatial temporal world of things and the ideal world of concepts, metaphysical thought does not tolerate any common element. These are antinomically separated spheres. However, according to Marx, the abstraction commodity is precisely constructed as belonging in both spheres. This is precisely what makes it special. So it's something that is somewhat a weird category, right? So it's not either a physical category, it's not a thought abstraction, it's an abstraction that is out there, that does not reduce, because it's an abstraction, to a spatial temporal element. So thesis two. So I'm dividing real abstraction in two theses instead of one, right? So I'm saying like there is the thesis of the sheer existence of a real abstraction that comes about through the exchange abstraction, as Conrad already explained this morning. And there is a second, more polemical thesis, which is the thesis of the transmission between these real abstraction and thought, and the forms of thought. So this is the real complicated issue here. Like I think most people like have a problem with this part of Zonhattel. So the origin of the forms of consciousness and knowledge is neither empirical nor ontological, but historical. The forms of thought, these modes in which cast particular data, do not drift. This is the core of Zonhattel theory of thought itself, but human action. Not of the action as such, as a category itself, philosophical and abstract, but of the historical and concrete action of men. The shapes of the thought, hence the intellect, different from the simple contents of consciousness, are each time the expression of an era in the social relationships of men. Within this context, however, they have objective validity. So this is also kind of a parsing of the thesis that social being determines consciousness, of course, but the real problem for us here for this paper that I wrote is under what conditions real abstraction that happens without the participation of the consciousness, because when exchange abstraction emerges, the exchangers are interested in the use values of the goods being exchanged and not in the exchange abstraction itself. So actually, it's something that happens behind the backs of the exchangers. So in what sense such a phenomenon that never at least while it happens, doesn't enter consciousness, ends up begetting the structure of the structure and categories of the transcendental subject, right? And of Greek philosophy, and of Galilean science, which are the three examples that Zonhatl likes to explore. So here's the problem. In a sense, my suspicion at the time was that this would be a form of a given in a certain sense, like the direct communication between real abstraction and consciousness. Is that a form of the given or not? So I have to introduce the critique of the given now. So the critique of the given stems from the philosophy of Wilfrid Sellars. So here's the first one, the epistemic given. So you have like the famous inconsistent triad, like A, S senses red, sense content X entails S non-inferentially believes that X is red, which means like if you see something as a red object, by itself, this experience entails the belief that there is a red object in the environment. Second premise, the ability to sense context is unacquired. And C, the capacity to have classificatory beliefs of the form X is F is acquired. So the idea that you have like simple sense contents is unacquired, but to classify the environment as an X is F with a propositional, with a proposition is acquired. So the problem hinges on the transmission of a justificatory chain between sensing and knowing. Sellars differentiates between causal chains and justificatory chains. If it is possible to sense facts, then sensible contexts have propositional form, and we are capturing a given. Sustaining A and B implies negating C. Sustaining B and C implies negating A. Sustaining A and C implies negating B. So you can't have the three at the same time. So you have to choose. So, of course, the critique of the given Sellars solution is to reject A, like just sensing red does not entail non-inferentially believing that something is red, because there are more capacities that enter into the game when, between just the sensing and the statement of belief. The critique of the given, the second one, is a categorical given. So here's his expression of it. If a person is directly aware of an item which has categorical status C, then the person is aware of it as having categorical status C. This principle is perhaps the most basic form of what I have castigated as the myth of the given. To reject the myth of the given is to reject the idea that the categorical structure of the world, if it has a categorical structure, imposes itself on the mind as a seal imposes itself on melted wax. So this is the problem of the given, the idea that the categorical structure of the world is transparent, which is in direct contradiction to the methodological dictum of Marx that I quoted in the beginning of this presentation, right? Like you have to reconstruct concreteness out of the adequate abstractions. So it's not this categorical structure is the result of a work of the concept in a certain sense. So the horizontal given, I like this because it's really kind of concise expression of what the problem of the given is. The given is epistemically independent, which means you encounter it not as a result of any other knowledge that you previously had. What he says, whatever positive epistemic status or cognitive encounter with the object it has, it does not depend on the epistemic status of any other cognitive state. Notice that epistemic independence does not follow from immediacy, not being inferred from other knowledge, unless the only form of epistemic dependence is actual inference. So the given is epistemically efficacious, that is, it can transmit positive epistemic status to other cognitive states of ours. The problem is being epistemically independent and efficacious at the same time. So this closes us into a conundrum. Like we have either a coherentism, because in order to be epistemically efficacious, it has to be inferentially related. One content has to be inferentially related to other contents. And to be epistemically independent, it has to come from the outside. So we are kind of torn between a form of coherentism and a form of the given. So what is the right recipe to get out of this problem. So here again, there's a quote about by Justin Evans, but I just explained it. And there's again Conrad. If one resorts to rationalist or coherentist explanation to resolve this, that is, if they treat scientific knowledge as generated within a closed circle, they're left with the difficulty of explaining how such theorems, beyond being deductively valid, have predictive power within the inductive framework of the sciences. On the other hand, if they attempt to explain these theorems wholly empirically or based on a principle of correspondence, they're alternatively forced to justify how something like the principle of inertia, which has no clear basis in lived experience, could emerge tabula rasa. So it's you have like the same homological kind of problem. So a preliminary question concerning real abstraction is the following. If real abstractions are in the mind but not of it, the question of its transmission to the mind arises. A, if the real abstraction is something that happens independently of cognition, it seems to causally constrain behavior, which doesn't entail by itself being in a justificatory relation to other contents. B, if the real abstraction is in a justificatory relation, which means has categorical status, it can't be something that emerges independently of cognition simpliciter. So either it justifies other things, like it has like conceptual status, therefore you can uphold that, for instance, it has categorical status too, like it constitutes the form of a transcendental, Kantian transcendental subject, for instance, or it is something that happens independently that may constrain behavior, but not justify behavior because it's not in an inferential relationship to other contents. So if A is true, then real abstraction can't do the further work Zonnhatl wants it to be the origin of the categories of the understanding in the Kantian sense. If B is true, then a specific division of labor has to obtain between sensibility and cognition for it to take hold. Our solution will try to find a juncture between thinking and doing that would vindicate B, and by doing so, it will also be compatible with A in the sense of accepting real abstractions as constraints upon behavior in the causal sense, but with a specific set of caveats. So the category that I feel Sellers can contribute that solves these problems is the pattern-governed behavior. So pattern-governed behavior exemplifies an abstract pattern or a part of a pattern, not as an instance of a causal law, nor as a mere happenstance, nor as a result of self-consciously obeying a rule. This kind of complex behavior cannot be individuated, except in terms of its place within an abstract pattern. A pigeon that happens to stretch its neck and open wide its beak in accord with the mating dance of the albatross does not do so in virtue of this mating pattern, although the albatross does. The beak opening behavior of the albatross is not mere opening wide as it is for the pigeon, but is an integral part of its mating dance. Sellers' favorite example of pattern-governed behavior is the dance of a bee that communicates the location of a field of nectar-bearing flowers. So it's not conceptual, but it's constitutive of a certain bodily experience of a certain animal or a certain being. And you could arguably extend pattern-governed behavior to social circuits of determination or form determinations, right? So my proposal is to treat the exchange abstraction as an emerging pattern, the overt side of which is part and parcel of intentional behavior of those that are invested in exchange, but whose product surpasses the reach of the norms that codify the act of exchange. In a sense, the concept of socially necessary illusion ideology is here retained and recast as a mismatch between the way a certain operational scheme functions, the subject of which is not us, but the valorization of value itself, and the way it appears to us as agents that are feeding the scheme. So we misidentify the agents. Norms and world pictures. So for Sellers, and here we might approach an answer that may be valid for Husserlian ideology, material inferences are codified by modal vocabulary that state possible affairs that might obtain in connection to what the singular terms are referring to. So here's a very technical language, sorry about that. I wish I had more time to explain it, but the idea is that since the conceptualization is not sheer contact with the object, in the kind of Salesian sense, conceptualization entails that you have the object participate in a set of material inferences. So you use, for instance, the word water as if water is something that could satisfy your thirst, or could put out a fire, or whatever, or is chemically H2O. So there's a bunch of inference that can be drawn from the concept of water that actually makes that concept participate in an inferentially articulated network that makes it also candidates to knowledge, or participants in knowledge. So the way you use vocabulary is always mediated and constituted by these material inferences for him. And these material inferences codify what we think are the capacities, the dispositions, the non-empirical, therefore, because they are not immediate, at least, the dispositions of the objects around. So these constitute what sellers call a world picture. So since there is no given, we are always already in the business of constituting world pictures, which does not mean that they don't have reference. So in a sense, you have like a coherentist kind of justificatory circle, while at the same time a way out that is also a representational interface with the outside. So it is in that sense that the theoretical object is always different from the real object. So this is the moment of truth in the Althusserdian picture, as a result of the process by which observation and language come together in the assignment of inference tickets that enable to track the behavior of the putative real objects being referred to. These are world pictures produced by language, out of which comes the crystallizations that Sellers calls manifest and scientific images. But then the issue of the conscious thematization of the pattern emerges. If we advanced important points against the Althusserdian picture, here we shall retain something of the latter. If there is something pertaining to the theoretical object that is constituted as pattern beyond theoretical practice, its overt theorization casts the pattern in theoretical form as the categories of a science. The conceptualized pattern does not follow immediately from the patterned behavior, but is painstakingly hypothesized out of what appears to us as the social world we are in. Reconstructing the mediations between all these instances becomes the goal of the reproduction of the concrete in thought. This is the moment of truth of the Althusserdian division of real object and object of knowledge. Any object of knowledge is an explanatory candidate that might successfully or not express as concrete in thought what is concrete in act, or what appears as concrete in act. So, approaching the end, on the concreteness of abstractions, a third form of a given. One final speculation that we would like to offer has to do not with a diachronic succession and circuits between social forms and conceptual categories, but with this synchronic grasp of multiscalar real determination. A final speculative proposal is what I call the no privilege scale thesis. It is related to a putative third form of the given, the synchronic scalar given. There is another important point to understand about observation. There is no fixed set of characteristics of physical objects to which observations are limited. That is, there is no clear-cut or principled limit on the vocabulary that can appropriately appear in observation claims. We can form non-inferential observation beliefs about red balls before us, but with adequate training, we can also make direct non-inferential reports of the equation of a quasar on an alpha particle in a cloud chamber. Observation reports need only be reliable responses, whatever vocabulary is used. Sellers believes that there is a special vocabulary that we employ in minimalist observation claims. That is, observation claims in which we risk as little as possible without moving up or back a level and characterizing our experience rather than the world. So there's no given in the sense of the phenomenal scale where objects are given. This is a contingent feature of our experience. Since we are constituting world pictures, and since we can be trained to use a determinate vocabulary, and this determinate vocabulary will determine the types of objects that we are enmeshed with and dealing with. This means that There is no one slice of experience that we are basically closed in, right? So we may be able to vary our scalar perception in using vocabulary. So this is also relevant to the methodological problem at hand, in the sense that we are able to use concepts such as the example that Marx gives in the first quote, which is the population, and how you constitute the concept of population, and how you come to see things in terms of these theoretical terms, which is important for any Marxist analysis. So, and then there's this thesis of the sensitivity of organizations that kind of follows, is compatible with this insight, even though it is not directly derived from it, which is a thesis from the subset of theoretical practice, which was a collective I was part of for a while. So here it's, well, here's the text. If world pictures are ineliminable, but they are also the means through which we gain cognitive traction upon the world. This means that seeing phenomena as simultaneously inhabiting multiple scales enable political experiments once the specific sensitivity of organizations come into play. For instance, a chain of department stores is especially sensitive to the movement of its market niche, cost of transportation and supplies, where a social housing movement occupying abandoned buildings will have a grasp of the lower prices of rent and of the movements of repressive state forces in different areas of the city. One can consider how these two examples might map the city differently according to their own interests. So this is kind of an interplay between the composition of certain organization and an intelligibility that is yielded by this composition. If we see, if we start seeing in multiple scales at the same time. So this yields also political experimentation. From the point of view of the individual agent, this amounts to a form of surrogate reasoning, wherein the reactiveness of a social system is brought into cognitive friction with the hypothesizing that happens once the patterns that constitute these very social forms are objectified in thought and in action, which enables one to come up with political experience that extract information from the interaction between organization and environment through the variation of its form of operation and the types of external reaction they elicit. So this was my final speculation, kind of trying to reach out to a certain kind of a political kind of consequence in terms of experimentation out of certain this interplay between the philosophy of science by Sellers and the idea of real abstraction in Zonhattel. So yeah, I think that was it. My time is up, probably, right? Okay, thank you.
So that was, yeah, that's about it. Perfect.